Hello friends, I'm Nukebrush and today we are going to make Krieg Artillery Tank.
Time to go nuclear.
This model came to me already printed. By the way, not all the parts were available, but more on that later. This artillery tank is one of those long-term projects. It's not quite as procrastinated as the Grot jet fighter from my previous video, but it still took me almost a year to paint it. I am not as lazy as I think of myself. I was just working on several or rather many projects at once. The result is predictable, the grey pile of shame only grows. And in my opinion, the only thing worse than a grey pile of shame is a not quite painted pile of shame. So I am gradually improving, taking countless models from the almost finished state to the ready to be published condition. In any case, assembling this particular artillery tank isn't difficult at all. To be honest, the print quality of the model is quite average, but that's not a problem. The protruding support marks can be sanded down and the rest will be covered with primer and paint. All the parts fit well and bond perfectly with superglue. This model comes with two barrel options, so we'll need to install magnets, but that's not difficult at all. Remember, when working with resin printed models, wear protective gloves, a respirator and goggles. The model itself must be cleaned of resin dust and other scabs. After the cleaning, our tank is ready for priming. First I apply 1 or 2 thin coats of neutral primer diluted with thinner and let it dry completely. As always, I use grey primer Mr. Model 1000, which is great for identifying problem areas that need repair. In my case, I needed to fill several spots using different types of filler, thick putty for deep processes and liquid primer filler for finer work. After the fillers has dried, we can sand the spots and apply another coat of primer. The main thing is to remember to clean the model of dust again. When we are satisfied with the results, we can move on to painting. For this artillery tank, I chose the classic color scheme of Krieg units, blue. The base color will be red-brown primer from Vallejo. It will give our blue the necessary brightness and saturation. Furthermore, the purpose of the brown primer is to create additional shadows on the model, so I apply it lightly but firmly over the entire surface of the tank. Don't forget about the removable parts either. At this stage we also start working on the tracks. I need a base rust, meaning nice brown bases that will show through the metallic layer. I already used a reddish brown color for the body parts, so I used a primer with different brown shade for the tracks. Using the dry brush technique, I imitate the base sheen of the metal. I work over the entire surface of the tracks, without applying too much brush pressure. I want the effect of worn metal over rust from daily use, not fresh metal shine right from the factory. Nothing complicated, just a little precision. This is the first preparatory stage of working on the tracks. Next they will be weathered, but that will be during the chipping and damage application stage. So let's cover the tracks with masking tape and move on to other things. The main color of our tank, as I already mentioned, is blue. I use a dull blue paint, applying it to all surfaces of the model in several thin layers. I want a nice smooth surface without any paint overflow and with the red-brown base layer showing through. When the paint is dry, I begin highlighting the vehicle panels. To do this, I add a lighter shade to the blue base, in my case a greenish blue. I didn't create a zenithal lighting effect on the model, but I still try to highlight well-lit areas of the tank, avoiding using light paint on the lower panels and elements facing the ground. When the paint is dry, I can begin highlighting the paneling elements, rivets, rod wheel caps, hatches and other protruding details. I chose light blue paint as the appropriate color for this step. I use dry brush technique and work carefully and lightly with a minimal amount of paint on the brush. The key when using the dry brush method is not to accumulate too much paint on protruding elements, which can ultimately create a muddy look. And that's not what we want. Somewhere on the stage of applying the base blue, I realized that I need to break up the monotony of dull colors with something bright, while still maintaining the Krieg style. So I used masking tape to cover part of the hull and applied a vertical stripe of the characteristic dark bluish red color to the left side of the tank. I applied the red paint slowly in several thin layers to cover the base blue. Done! Now I can start painting the details. Since our tank has seen a lot of use, I'll simulate wear on its components. Let's start with the exhaust pipes. I don't want them to look completely burnt out or rusty, but rather well worn. Therefore, we need to simulate paint chips down to rust, possible rust streaks, dirt and carbon deposits, and of course, soot. To simulate paint chips, I use light blue paint, a sponge and a brush. By the way, you might notice an empty corner near the engine cover. Yes, a certain structural element is missing there. Well, there is nothing to be done about it now. No one will remember where the technical element went. But let's get back to painting our exhaust pipes. I use various types of rust imitating paints to simulate streaks on the cylinders. I use light gray paint to depict metal burned to a white color, and I create the exhaust suit using black paint and a dry brush technique. I'm painting a few purely metal elements of our tank with a light bright metallic paint. The final color is somewhere between silver and steel. Don't worry, those details won't be too shiny, as I'll be using washes and chipping techniques. Let's continue to add details to our artillery tank. You probably already noticed white diamond sign depicting an attacking ram on the right side of the model. This is a custom stencil, handmade and cut from masking tape. You can find the exact method in my previous videos. I paint the white background in two stages. First a grey base coat, then a final white paint. I also applied white stripes on one of the barrels using the same principle. After the white paint has dried thoroughly, I can cover it with the next layer mask depicting the unit's image and apply the black paint. Next, I coat the entire model with gloss varnish and begin applying the decals. As always, I use modeling chemicals for better adhesion and a more secure bond. Nothing complicated, just careful approach. If the decals are shiny, and believe me they are quite shiny, we'll use a matting liquid. Once all the insignia is in place and completely dry, I coat our tank again with a coat of varnish, this time matte one. All that's left is to paint the lenses and optics, and then we can begin adding weathering to the model. This vehicle doesn't have many optics: commander's cupola, front hatch triplex, searchlight and a fender rangefinder. I think it's a rangefinder, although who knows what purpose the tank designer intended for this optical device. As you may know, I always try to highlight all the triplexes and lenses on my models. Our Krieg Artillery Tank is no exception. First I paint the command cupola triplexes red using a well-known pattern. The lower left corner is the brightest, the upper right is the darkest. Nothing complicated again, just patience and precision. Then I glue a piece of transparent plastic with pink holographic film over the painted triplex. This way our optical device will reflect light and catch the eye. Painting the searchlight is also easy. First I apply a base coat of light blue color. Once it's dry, I use a blue wash to create natural shadows along the edges of the lens. Then, using light white paint, I highlight the circles of the lamp and the spotlight's concentrating lens. The final touch is a blue varnish, which unifies all the colors and adds a subtle sheen, simulating a presence of glass. Finally, I'll add a clear gloss varnish to emphasize the optics even more. So let's work on the damage and weathering of the model. As always, we start with chipping. If you watch my videos, you'll notice that I love creating chipping on models. Sometimes even too much. What can I say in my defense? I guess I just enjoy working with a brush. Furthermore, creating chipping allows you to hide painting defects on 3D models, or the artist's clumsy hands, to be honest. Of course it doesn't always work, but it's still a good method for disguising obvious mistakes. To create chipping I use a sponge with a minimal amount of paint, and then I thin brush. First I work on imitation of light chipping in the top layer of paint, using a brighter color than a tank main camo. The first parts to be damaged are the most active, moving elements of the vehicle, the corners and underbody of the tank, chassis components, gun ports and barrels themselves, hatches and so on. It is important to remember that too many chips will overflow the model, making it dirty and unreadable, so don't be like me, don't overdo it. When you are more or less satisfied with the amount of damage you created, you can move on to simulating deeper damage, chips down to rust. I use dark brown paint and apply it with a brush to the deepest chips. I try not to completely cover the lighter paint, thus creating a halo effect around the deep scratch or crack. During the final weathering stage, we'll enhance the visual effect of the damage with rust stains, as if to show that our chips are old enough to have their own rust streaks. But for now, let's return to our tracks. The second stage of work on the tank tracks involves thoroughly working on the rubber pads. First I apply the dark grey paint, a color reminiscent of faded, well-used rubber. Then, once the grey paint has dried, I randomly apply light colored dots and stripes to simulate chips and cracks of the rubber. Then I use a fine point ink marker to emphasize the depths of these damages and chips. The final steps on the tracks is applying a black oil wash to the entire track surface, meaning both the metal and rubber parts. This is necessary to unify all the colors of our tank tracks and to create deep shadows. I try to work carefully, but not too carefully, as any excess wash can be removed with a cotton swab, cloth or brush dipped in thinner. Next I apply the same black enamel wash to almost every surface of our tank. I need nice shadows in the recesses and round protruding detailing elements. It is not difficult, but it's quite meditating work, and most importantly, it's also smelly work. So be sure to work with a respirator and in a well-ventilated area. Remember how I promised to enhance the visual impact of our chips and damage? That moment has arrived. I use the rust wash to create streaks and spots of rust on what I consider to be the most significant chips. Using a brush dipped in thinner, I adjust the area of the rust spot on the tank surfaces. We are almost done with the model, friends. All that's left is to apply a soot to the exhaust pipes and carbon deposits to the gun barrels using dry pigments, and add streaks of fuel and engine oil in appropriate and not so appropriate places. Our Krieg artillery tank is ready. Thanks for spending your time with me. If you liked the video and want to see more models like this, feel free to comment, like and share it. And also subscribe to the channel. Good luck with your models and see you soon.